Good evening and welcome to The Big Picture, where we take a closer look at one of the big stories of the day. And today, undoubtedly, is how Congress continued to stall the government's efforts to pass the GST bill in Rajya Sabha, with the Congress refusing to call off protests to allow a discussion on it. Rajya Sabha was adjourned till tomorrow amid the disruption, but are the dynamics within the opposition slowly changing? Mulayam Singh, for one, told the Congress that he wouldn't be part of the opposition in-house if work continues to be stalled. To discuss this, we have in studio this evening a distinguished panel. Of course, from the capital, we are being joined by Mr. Shankar Aiyar of the Congress. We have Gopal Krishna Agarwal, the BJP spokesperson, joining us on the phone line. Here in studio, of course, we have senior journalist Priya Ranjan and Professor Pinaki Chakraborty from the NIPFP. In fact, if I could start with you, Mr. Aiyar, of course, in Parliament, no work as well today as well. Mr. Jaitley, of course, saying that the Congress is blocking reforms. What would you say?
I'd say that Mr. Jaitley, as usual, is wrong. We are not blocking reforms. In fact, the GST is our reform, which was blocked by Mr. Jaitley for several years until he suddenly became a convert. And with the zeal of a new convert, he is now trying to argue that merely because his signature is on the bill, without examining what our objections to the present bill are, that if we object, that means that we are against development and growth. This is a completely bogus argument. We have put down very cogent reasons why we think that the amendment bill needs to be further amended before it is acceptable to the Congress party.
All right. But then at this point of time, any discussion on it, of course, doesn't seem to be happening because you are just stalling work irrespective of what the government is trying to initiate. Not, of course, accepting those demands of yours for the resignations of the ministers. But, with Mulayam Singh also saying that he does not want to be part of this protest if work continues to be stalled in the House. Are you worried at all that the BJP may perhaps be getting people on its side?
I'm not worried in the least bit. Ours is not a position of winning or losing this particular argument, but of placing before the nation the reasons why we have reservations about the existing bill. That's the totality of it. And I'm not sure that we are not doing any work. We're trying to get the most important work before this nation done, which is to secure the resignation of a central minister who has clearly transgressed the bounds of propriety. And incidentally also to bring to light the wrongdoings of two chief ministers of BJP origin.
Mr. Agarwal, if you could hear what Mr. Aiyar had to say, just talking about how things are progressing in the House, are you confident at all that perhaps the GST bill at least would get passed in Parliament?
No, with the attitude that the Congress is showing, we are not saying that the Congress is only opposing the GST. It is opposing the whole parliamentary process. It is opposing the democratic rights of the people, where every bill has to be put before the Parliament and before the legislation is passed, they have to be discussed. They are not allowing the Parliament to function. That's what we are calling it, is opposing the economic reforms. So whether it is land bill, whether it is GST, any bill, if they have objection to any clause or anything, we are ready to discuss. How will you move ahead if you are not allowing the Parliament to function, bill to be placed, and the way they are behaving? It is completely disgusting the way Congress is behaving. If they have objection, who is telling that we are not ready to listen? Let the bill be placed before the Parliament in Lok Sabha, Rajya Sabha, discuss this clause-wise. There are standing committees, their recommendations are there. There are standing councils which has given their rationales. They have written blogs. Arun Jaitley ji, FM has replied to those blogs. Even all the issues have to be discussed. Ultimately, if you don't allow the Parliament to function, that shows that they don't want the bills to be passed, they don't want legislation to be move ahead, they are against economic development. They want to block the economic development of the country. That is the question now coming to our mind, and that they have to answer this. Do they want the economic development of the country? Do they want the economy to be moving ahead? Do they want the country to move ahead, or just block it and stop?
The person you are...
All right, we'll try and get back to that phone line. But as you could hear, of course, Mr. Agarwal, they're clearly blaming the Congress for trying to stall economic reforms and progress in the country. This is, of course, Professor Pinaki being touted as one of the biggest economic reforms we'd be seeing in India in the recent years. Do you think that the BJP is valid in claiming that the Congress is trying to stall this?
Well, I am not an expert on politics or the political economy of tax reform. So I would like to highlight a couple of issues with regard to the indirect tax reform that this country had. I think the issues that has come before the country and the economy is that GST is going to push up growth by 1 to 2%. There are estimates that shows that. And
Mr. Arun Jaitley claiming 2%,
it has talked about having a common market for the country. And also it has talked about a clean tax system for indirect taxes. So these are all good aspects of GST. Now the question is how good the bill is. And before I talk about the bill, the various provisions of the bill, I would also like to mention here two very important indirect tax reform that has already happened and that has brought in a lot of benefits to the economy. First is the introduction of VAT in 2005, and the second major reform which has happened, but it was it was not taken note of adequately, I believe, is the introduction of negative list in service taxes. That means you are moving away from positive list to the negative list, that these are the services which I will not tax, but rest of the services will have to be taxed. I think it was introduced, this concept was introduced, if I am not wrong, in 2011. So you have a generalized sales tax already, service tax system already in operation. Now the point here is that how do you get that benefit for the states also to tax services? So there is a need for constitutional amendment. So I think the benefits of a generalized, non-distortionary service tax regime in a broad sense is already there. Now we have to move towards GST. And since states cannot tax services and center cannot tax consumption, we need to have a constitutional amendment. I think constitutional amendment bill has, if you look at the 115th amendment bill, 122nd amendment bill, there are certain provisions which are definitely good. And the first aspect, I will say that there was huge trust deficit between center and states with regard to the compensation that will be given to the states. That was brought into the constitutional amendment bill. So there is a legal backing for compensation if there is revenue loss. That should give a lot of comfort to the states. That's the first point. The second point I would like to mention here is that when we are talking about broad-based GST, when we are talking about it is going to create common market, when we are going to talk about simplifying the tax system, removing the cascading, we really cannot have special provisions. But as the political economy of this country or any other country, I think there is, with this concept of flawless GST never works anywhere in the world. So in case of India also, we have seen there are two critical provisions in the bill of which I have certain discomfort with those provisions. One is that we have kept the petroleum products outside the GST net. So and petroleum has a serious cascading issues because it's an intermediate input, especially diesels, not the petrol. So that is not brought in. That is understandable in the sense that this gives huge revenue. Both state and center gets a lot of revenue out of it, and they are apprehensive about it. But the point is, they should have, at least in the bill, should have said that we will introduce it in a specific date. That date has not been given. It has been said that it will be introduced. But it's quite unlikely that it will be introduced very soon. So the cascading will continue along with GST. That is one flaw that GST bill has. And the second aspect of the GST bill, I think, is very important to understanding the issue of applying a 1% CST on interstate supply of goods. It's not only sale, it's on supply. So that means consignment transfer also will be taxed. So that also will have a significant tax exportation from the richer consuming states to the poorer consuming, richer producing states to the poorer consuming states. So that is also another concern. But there is a silver lining there that says after 2 years it will go. So I think GST bill is a mixed bill. It has given comfort to the states, and the select committee in Rajya Sabha has said no, the compensation should be for 100% for the 5 years. So that way states should get a comfort level, and an entire revenue loss will be compensated. But these special provisions that are there in the bill, that would still have a cascading to continue. But I would not say that GST you can have a flawless GST. Probably these are political economy of tax reform which you have to compromise
with that? And in the current scenario, We were, of course, talking about how it doesn't seem like in Parliament, at least, this bill is going to get passed in the current scenario. Like Mr. Aiyar himself is putting it, there's going to be no work in place. But do you agree that the GST is going to change, is going to bring in economic reforms, that 2% GDP growth that Mr. Jaitley is talking about? And when the Congress opposes something like that, what is the kind of perception that it has, especially among people who are watching proceedings in Parliament?
Well, there is no denying that GST is one of the the most radical of reforms that's been conceived, and it's going to benefit people in general. It's going to have salutary effect on prices to start with. It will help create jobs, and it will help raise incomes. So whether it results in 2 percentage point additional growth, economic growth, or 1.5% or 1%, that's a matter of details. But and different estimates have been made. But there is no doubt about the fact that GST, which is adopted in over 100 countries already, is a modern, transparent, value-added tax system, which this country has been looking forward to for so many years and is not being delivered. Now, at the state level, as Pinaki was mentioning, we've had the benefit of the state level tax, sales tax being substituted by VAT, and that has brought in the benefit. And so a GST, when it is for all goods and services, a uniform, a transparent, value-added tax system, that's going to benefit the economy and people in general. Now, the question is that the politics is holding economics to ransom.
Yes.
And that's been happening for very long. BJP, has held it. The former Prime Minister is on record having said that extraneous factors made BJP block it for several years. From 2006, when it was the idea crystallized, and 2011, when the Constitutional Amendment Bill was actually moved, a lot of time has been wasted, and several deadlines for introducing GST have fallen by the wayside. Now, this is just pure, I would say, mindless politics that happened in the previous period that we have seen and is happening now. There is very little logic. I don't even see a political logic for what we are watching happening in Parliament, the disruption that is being caused. Now, Mr. Aiyar has just mentioned that indeed Congress has objections to the GST bill itself. Now, those objections have not been spelled out. They might have been spelled out in the select committee, but the select committee report is now available to the House, should be discussed, and Congress should raise those objections.
Absolutely.
And because, after all, like Pinaki mentioned, there is not going to be a flawless GST. There will be flaws, and this is a constitutional amendment bill. The GST, an entire process has to go through if you have to meet the April 1st, 2016 deadline.
That's right.
The GST bill has to come, which will actually spell out a lot of details, and you have time. If you let the constitutional amendment bill out of the way in terms of getting it passed, then you will have the enabling provision to go ahead with the GST bill, and then certain details can be, and certain flaws in the present scheme of things can be addressed even at that stage.
Mr. Aiyar, this is one of the things that experts are also saying, that this bill, in pretty much, not totality perhaps, but it's pretty much the bill that you had, the UPA government had in fact brought in. You, of course, claimed that earlier Mr. Arun Jaitley and Mr. Modi, of course, had, they were opposing it. Now that they are in government, they are bringing it back and making it seem like it's their own. but you're opposing it now. So it does seem like, you will let it be, you will let it pass only if you are in power. And that, of course, are you not worried that this is going to backfire for you?
Not in the least, unless you continue twisting and distorting the facts, as has been happening on this program. There are fundamental reasons why the Constitution Amendment Bill should be taken seriously. Now, for instance, in our 2011 bill, we had provision for a GST tax settlement dispute authority. Now, the present bill says that the very states and centre will be party to every single dispute, are going to become judges in their own cause in a GST council that does not have a tax dispute settlement authority. Now, that's a fundamental difference between 2011 and 2015. And there has been no attempt made by the BJP to meet with us even outside of Parliament to try and resolve this difference. Equally on the question of the ceiling to be applied, there's been no attempt to meet with us. And all we get is cheap jibes by Arun Jaitley on an article which I wrote in which I spelt out what were the reasons why we were objecting to certain provisions of this bill. Above all is the one that was mentioned a little earlier, but has not, the significance of which has perhaps not come through, that this is not a comprehensive bill. Unless you have electricity included, unless you have petroleum products or the majority of petroleum products included, you do not get a comprehensive bill. Equally, very highly revenue generating items like alcohol for human consumption need to be included if this is to be truly a comprehensive bill. Now you produce a half-baked bill before us and you tell us that you better sign it because you had produced something similar in the past. This is trying to put a pistol to our temple and say agree to whatever we say, because whatever objections we had in the past, we have withdrawn those objections because there's been a change of government. And the government that most objected to the 2011 bill was the government of a man called Narendra Modi. It was that government which stalled things. So I don't understand how these converts, this new zeal, they can talk to us in the terms in which they are doing. If they wish to have a settlement, then it is necessary for them to approach us outside the framework of the party, of the parliament, and have a discussion among us to see which our objections we may be willing to compromise on and which of our objections they will be ready to compromise on. It is only in that way that we can move forward. But this attempt at pushing through a diktat, I'm afraid, is not acceptable to us as even normal parliamentary practice.
Mr. Agarwal, is that at all among the strategies that you are at least considering?
Sorry, may I make one more point?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Aiyar.
The one other point which I wish to stress is that neither in 2011 nor in 2015 has adequate consideration been given to the panchayats and the municipalities. Ever since 1992, we have had amendments in the Constitution which have given constitutional sanctity and status and protection to the third tier of government. And the third tier of government, particularly in urban areas, is going to be very seriously affected by what has happened. So we have made some proposals that principles relating to the share of local bodies in revenue buoyancy must be discussed in the GST Council. What is their objection to discussing it? And they've trotted out a totally bogus reason that state finance commissions can do that. But surely Jaitley knows that whereas by tradition the Central Finance Commission's recommendations are always accepted in toto, equally State Finance Commission recommendations have not been accepted and by and large are gathering dust in very, very moldy cupboards. And therefore we need to protect the sound finances, which is a constitutional obligation of these local bodies. What is their objection to discussing this with us in detail?
Let me take this to the BJP spokesperson, Mr. Agarwal, if you can hear me. If you can hear me,
there is no consensus.
Mr. Aiyar,
What I want to say is, I don't know how much of my earlier contention was could be heard by the channel. I don't know.
No, we heard
was
it.
I on the line? So then some of the objections which Mr. Aiyar has raised, I want to state that what he is saying about the GST Council and setting up a tribunal, that was referred to the standing committee, and that standing committee had rejected this proposal, and it was accepted by the Congress. And now they are again, now it's an afterthought that they want to object to any of the issue. They are putting up this issue. With regard to uniform rate and putting up electricity, alcohol in the same bracket as other products, the answer has been given by the FM that some of the issues we have to take into consideration the state government's consideration. GST is a bill in which we have to take state governments on board. Therefore, these objections and some of the revenue streams which the state government wanted to be excluded, and it was consensus was built on the this GST Council. After that, they have been accepted by us that electricity, alcohol, and tobacco, these revenue stream at present be kept out of it. At a later stage, it will be brought into then it can be brought into the bill. So the third thing is about the rate. 18%, even the GST Council has said that the revenue neutral, the basic concept of the GST bill was it had to be made a revenue neutral, and the revenue neutral rate comes out to be 27%. So when the rate is 27% is the revenue neutral percentage as described by the GST Council, and now the Congress is saying the upper cap be fixed at 18%. How this is possible? These are some of the issues, though still he is saying that we want to debate. Now where they want to debate? They are not allowing in the parliament the bill to be placed. Then where they want to debate, we are not
Mr. Aiyar
sure.
wanting to respond to that, Mr. Aiyar.
I want to respond to it by reminding you that I said we had fundamental objections. Now, one of the most fundamental objections is that this so-called revenue neutral rate makes an indirect tax go up to just a few percentage points below a direct tax. All indirect taxes are highly regressive, which means that the burden of those taxes falls most heavily upon the poorer consumers and above all the poorest consumer. Now you want, in the interest of some GDP rate or some common market, to completely give up the principle of social equity? How can we possibly have an indirect tax of 27%? That's exactly why brought in as an amendment 18% as the ceiling. And then we would have agreed, if they talked about it more, to a sin tax on tobacco and alcohol. We can consider that separately. But how can you have a comprehensive tax which does not include key inputs like a majority of petroleum products and all of electricity?
That's in fact a point, Professor Pinaki. That is what you've been stressing on as well. Mr. Aiyar, I'm bringing in Professor Pinaki. Professor Pinaki would like to say, you would add to that.
Yeah, the revenue neutral rate is something I think we are putting a lot of emphasis on it. I think it's a dynamic process which is evolving, and revenue neutral rate calculations, there are a lot of rates floating around because it varies from 27% to the 18% rate that, and the Kelkar committee, if you look at the 2002-3 report where they have talked about a 20% rate, then the 13th Finance Commission has talked about the rate of around 12%. I definitely agree with Mr. Aiyar that 27% rate is too high. I really cannot have an indirect tax system with such a high rate. Now the point is that more and more goods and services, if you brought into the tax net, the rates will automatically come down. Now the point what is happening, what has happened in the last bill and this bill is that there are exemptions. Like petroleum, it is kept out. Now the fear is I lose revenue because 40% of my revenue comes from alcohol and petroleum. That's why it is not coming in. So this is a genuine concern of states.
All right.
And the point is how to solve it. I think someone has to understand the fact that the initial loss if you put in petroleum products into the bill, but the subsequent revenue gain you will have through the clean economic system, clean tax system will be much more. I think that initial shock nobody is willing to take. That's why rate is going up. And I'll just make one point on electricity duty. Electricity duty is an input and it should come under taxes. But the fact of the matter is, if you look at the bill doesn't talk about whether electricity duty should be part of it or not. But if you look at the GST Import Committee's first discussion report on GST, then you will see that they said the electricity duty will be kept out because of the revenue consideration. Now that is something, so revenue fear is keeping some of the very important input outside the GST bill and in the outside the GST network. So in the process, the coverage has become narrower and narrower, and we are getting absurdly high rates. And now we really cannot have GST with such a high rate, but rate should not be the concern, because the VAT was started with 12.5% rate. Now the VAT rate has been increased to 14.5%. That means there are 200 basis points in 10 years we have increased it. So if you are not getting revenue, increase the rate, but start with a reasonable rate. And I think that negotiation is possible, and it should be delinked from constitutional amendment.
Mr. Dash, very quickly, a very quick word. It looks like we're going to be discussing this further for a few more months, because it's definitely not looking like it could be passed in this session.
See, the main thing, you see, it was always conceived to be a grand bargain between the center and the states, and it was a very difficult process. Now, some amount of consensus or that bargain seems to have been reached. So we are in the uniform tax system looks as if it is within reach now.
It looks achievable, but of course politics is the big hindrance.
So
I'm very sorry.
you have to
all
start
of you.
with something.
All right, we'll have to leave it at that here on The Big Picture. Thank you so much to all our guests for joining us. Like we pointed out, by the looks of it, of course, it's politics that's bringing a hindrance really in this big economic reform. And like we pointed out, the politics is perhaps going to make us debate on this topic further ahead in the next few months. Thanks so much, though, for joining us. All our guests here, thank you so much for joining us.